Welcome back to another episode of The Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Lauren Conlon, and this week I'm joined by Rick, our team mental health counselor. It sounds like you're like a camp counselor for like the worst summer camp ever.
Conlon's kids.
Yeah. Oh my God, that'd be an actual horror show. Speaking of horror shows, listen, we try to record this later when it's not so loud in here because the office does get pretty loud. But there's the cleaning crew here, and earlier, like normally if there's like some sounds, it's like, okay. But there's like some vacuum situation happening where it's like this like low humming and then like a screech. So if you guys hear that, I'm very sorry in advance, but we're just going to roll with it. So today's topic is actually a question that was sent in, and honestly, this is so relevant. Now, if you hear this and you're like, oh, I've never experienced this exact situation, kind of like the architecture of the question, I think is really relevant. So maybe this exact experience isn't what you have dealt with, but this situation you would agree is pretty common, right? Or common at some point, people's.
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Like the person who wrote this, if you, like as you were describing that, I was going to say, if you haven't been through this yet, like strap in. It more than likely will happen at some point in your life.
Yeah. So without further ado, I have a crush, but I'm in a relationship, ... So the full question is, me and my boyfriend have been together for almost 13 years since high school. We go through ebbs and flows of our relationship, but sometimes life gets, busy, and the effort to make time, or even the ability to make time in our free time, gets to be difficult. This year, I find myself having a crush on my boss. I don't know if it's a romantic crush, but some of the attributes he has are attractive to me. His ambition, knowledge, intelligence, skill set, and passion for his career are some of those things, along with he is attractive. I feel extremely guilty because I love my boyfriend and would never want to do anything to hurt him, and I don't ever plan on pursuing this because I don't want to ruin my relationship or professional career because I do work directly with him a lot of the time. But how do you go about this? The guilt or confusion that comes with it. I'm already a very anxious person, so this has caused some extra anxiety in my life when it comes to home life and work. So, listen, this is a tough one, but like you said, at some point, many of us have found ourselves in sort of a situation like this, especially this is a 13-year relationship. So, therapist or camp counselor, what do we do?
Run 20 laps.
Yeah.
Okay.
And do sit-ups.
No, first and foremost, I want to thank whoever the person is that wrote the question and trust and believe that you are not alone. There's probably people listening to this right now that are going through the same thing. It is a fairly common phenomenon to find yourself in a relationship with somebody, and at some point, inevitably, depending on how long the relationship is, to find yourself attracted to somebody else. This is nothing new. And I say that just to kind of hopefully put your mind at ease to help you recognize and understand that what you're going through is normal. This is a typical byproduct of being in not only a relationship, but being a human being and interacting with new people throughout your entire day, your weeks, your years, your months that kind of roll on by. So being attracted to other people is normal. And for those of us listening, if you haven't been, this is actually something that I think occurs multiple times throughout a person's life. Even if you're in a great relationship and you're happy and you're with the person that you're like, oh my God, I'm spending the rest of my life with this person. I know them. They know me. It is not uncommon to find yourself attracted to somebody else at multiple times throughout your life. Like it's a byproduct. I kind of liken it to, just because you're in a relationship with somebody and that part of you even feels fulfilled, it doesn't turn off the part of you that found this person attractive, right? The person that you're in a relationship with, like you had to find them attractive. That part of you doesn't just shut off because you're in a relationship. People are going to come into your life that are going to have new energies, new ideas, new thoughts, new values. And, it doesn't hurt if they're physically attractive either. So those things captivate you. They capture your eye. And sometimes you can just find ourselves being like, hey, I'm in a happy relationship, but I have a crush or I have feelings for somebody else. I think the important part is what this person is doing is they're actually recognizing it and acknowledging it rather than like shoving it inside and pretending that it's not going to happen or allowing themselves to play out in some, unfortunate circumstances could occur.
For sure. And this is something where I think you were going to probably touch on it, but like this person is saying, like, I find these things attractive, right? So it's not necessarily just about like, oh, wow, this is just like a physical attraction. It's like, oh, maybe I find this, like you said, kind of idea or different energies attractive about this person. And that doesn't take away anything from your relationship. You know, it's just like, hey, I also like this. And maybe your partner has those things. Would you say, though, that maybe the partner doesn't have that? Is that sometimes where you kind of see that disconnect where it's like, oh, I find this really attractive in this other person, and then it's because maybe their partner doesn't have that? Or is that not like a common theme that you see?
It can be all of the above, so to speak. So, and I will kind of get into this. So part of what I want people to understand too is sometimes attraction borderlines on intimacy. And what I mean by intimacy is I think sometimes people think of intimacy as like this exclusive sexual component. But for most people, when you start to get into like, especially a therapeutic sense or a more complete sense of what intimacy is, it includes feelings of closeness, of safety, of connectedness, of trust. And so what I hear in that question is a 13-year relationship that started earlier in their life. They're in different life spaces right now. And so perhaps they may not have evolved. I think she alluded to the idea. I'm going to assume it's a she, by the way. So if it's not, sorry, but it's just for my purposes, it's a little easier. That she talked about there's a lack of effort that was being put in, or that there's a difficult time that they're not finding for each other. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So to me, I start hearing that and I start thinking like, okay, lack of effort. There might not be a sense of real connection that's happening there. They might not feel as close as they used to. And so the idea of somebody else coming into the picture is like, well, this person kind of stimulates me. They're new. They're exciting. Even if I've worked with them for years, like you might find yourself like, I've never been attracted to this person, but now all of a sudden I am. Mm-hmm. So I start hearing some things with intimacy. And then one of the other things that is really fundamentally important in understanding how this occurs and understanding your own kind of psychology is that as we progress through life, we change, right? In case in point, like think about who you were when you were graduating high school, what your goals, what your priorities were, who you were as an individual. And then think about, so you're like 18, 19 years old. Think about who you are in your 20s. You know, when you're in college and what your goals and ambitions are. It's dramatically different just in a 4-year period from what it was when you were in high school. Now fast forward to your 30s, right? You're a completely different person in your 30s than you are when you're 18, 19, 20 years old. And who you are in your 40s is different. And so I say that because what I want is change is inevitable. You're going to change as a person. Your outlook on life, your perspective, your mindset, your attitude, your value systems. If that's changing in you, it's also going to change in the person that you're with. And here's the crux of it. Are you changing in the same ways? Is the relationship evolving in kind of the same direction? Do we still have the same shared meaning and purpose within the relationship? Like, when you get together with somebody when you're in college, right? Like partying, drinking, being more spontaneous and impulsive is kind of a fun quality and trait. Well, let's fast forward 10 years. When we have a mortgage, when we have rent, when we have bills, when we have accountability, maybe we have a kid or maybe we don't. Suddenly spontaneous, like partying isn't the value anymore. The perspective has shifted. And so I think one of the most difficult aspects of maintaining relationships when we're young through getting into our 40s, and I say 40s because when you're 40, you're pretty much who you are. There's going to be some things that are going to happen in your life that are going to change you, but through your 20s and through your 30s, life circumstances and experiences are still happening to you for the first time. So things are going to shift, things are going to change. And is the relationship changing together? Are you growing together? And it's not uncommon for people to grow in different directions, in different ways, at different paces. And it can take the relationship time to catch up. And so it's not always that the relationship has to end. It's just these are what cause these lags in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially like they talked about in the beginning, like, life gets busy and it's hard to make time for one another. And like that is so obviously relevant to a lot of us, right? Especially when you've been in a relationship for a long time, you kind of start to, and I don't want to say this in a bad way, but like take things for granted, mm-hmm. right? And it's like, oh yeah, well, they'll always be there. So like, I'm going to go do this and then they're going to go do that. And then it's like, that's where that kind of time becomes difficult. Not just like the normal time, like work, commute, like other extraneous things that you have to do, but like just the kind of like, oh, well, we'll go do separate things. And then it's like, oh, well, this other person is over here and they're exhibiting all of these great qualities that maybe I may or may not be getting, right? And that becomes really interesting and like you said, that's all very normal. Acting on it is obviously different than feeling it, right? So this person is very clearly stating that they don't want to act on it, but the main, I guess, question or what to do with this like guilt and confusion and anxiety, because even if you recognize, like even if you detach and you're like, all right, like I know I'm not going to act on this, I don't want to, but like I'm still feeling this way and I genuinely like love my partner, but like this anxiety and guilt is still here. Like what can I do, I guess, about that?
Yeah. And so for me, this is where thinking about things a little differently, I think might actually help people. The person writing this views this as something that's causing intense anxiety, maybe even some shame or some embarrassment around it. And for me, this is an opportunity, not necessarily something that's bad, but it's an opportunity. And what I mean by that is it's an opportunity for honesty. And I think what happens is you nailed it when you said we take our relationships for granted. We do. Here's how you know this. Go back to when you first started dating. How much time, effort, and energy did you put into getting to know this person? Like responding to text messages and phone calls and planning dates and like thinking about the person. Okay.
Joking.
Versus what that effort looks like 2, 3, 4, 5 years into a relationship. And then all of a sudden we're like, we wonder why the relationship is struggling because we're not putting in the effort anymore. And in fact, I would say these two people or this couple, I would look at them and I would say, like, explain to me, like, write out your week for me. Tell me what's happening throughout your week. Like, let me hear your routines, your schedules. What I would hear inevitably is like their hygiene habits. They're getting ready for work. What projects and things that they have going on, what goals they're working toward. And I'm going to hear everything. We're going to get to the end of the week and I'm not going to hear anything that relates to the relationship. I'm not going to hear, like, on Mondays, I like to send my partner a thank you card or an I love you message because of whatever. Or on Tuesdays, I like to stop by the store and get their favorite food. Or, you know, I know that on Wednesdays, like, our laundry starts to pile up from the day. So I like to do this nice, like, fun thing for them where I do laundry. So I take it off their plate. Like, I don't hear any of that. And so we end up taking things for granted. We fall into routines. And by falling into routines, what I also recognize is when we start dating and then we get several years into a relationship, there's these like observations that we've made. We've heard the person make statements, judgments, things like this. And so they get registered in our minds and we don't challenge the person anymore. We don't necessarily like call out, like, I know this person doesn't like this, so I just don't do it or I don't say things. And so what ends up happening is the relationships, we start to create these dynamics and these patterns that don't necessarily work or allow for honesty anymore. And honesty and open communication is something that, like, when it happens in the beginning of a relationship, it has to be fostered throughout the relationship. Like, you're getting to know each other, so everything is new. But what happens when we know each other? And now we have to work on really communicating what our needs and our wants are. And so this allows the old dynamics and the old patterns to die, and we can create new ones that actually serve the relationship. And that to me is where this is at. It's like, okay, we've been together for 13 years. It's a long time by anybody's standards. And so I would say, like, okay, the relationship clearly has value to this person. They wrote in to a show for us to discuss it, right? So it's clear that this isn't just somebody who's looking to get out of a relationship and start, you know, an affair or a fling. But I would say what is pretty common is that in not recognizing that maybe our old ways, the way we started, the patterns that were created when we started dating each other are no longer serving us. And we've been maintaining these old structures for a really long time. And now it's like it's getting to a point where, like, outside interferences are starting to come in. And it's like we have a choice. I can continue to let these outside influences come into our lives and see where it goes. Or we can be honest with each other and say, this isn't working anymore. Not that we're broken to the point where we can't be together, but like, hey, we got to this point and everything got us here. But you know what? In order to get from point B to point C now, we need to create new rules, new structures, new dynamics in order to make the next step of our relationship. In order to go from 13 years to 25. That's like a whole new category, perhaps.
Yeah, the not challenging that person is such a good point because, you know, like you said, you know what someone, like, you know, like, okay, it's not the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, oh, this really bothers them. Like, I don't want to bring this up today. And obviously a lot of that has to do with like confrontation. And there's some people who are certainly more, confrontational and direct than others, right? Like some people listening are like, hell no, I would never let that slide. Okay, well, you don't know somebody who doesn't like confrontation then. You know, like there's, I would say more people than not, would you agree? And then more women than not, again, generalizations here, generally don't love confrontation. Or do you not see that?
I don't know if that would specifically put that on women
Okay.
as much as I would just say it is a characteristic of the relationship that
Yeah.
there's somebody who doesn't like conflict and there's somebody who's okay with it.
Yeah. Because if there's two people who like conflict, then it's just like a mayhem constantly. Or it could be great. I guess it really depends on how they manage.
Yeah, that could be a spicy relationship.
If they have like an integrated way of sharing their confrontations. But I think that's such a great point of like, we don't really challenge people because when the relationship is new, we don't know. So we're kind of more open and curious and are asking those things because we're genuinely asking them because we don't really know the answer. But when we know the answer and maybe we don't like the answer, we're kind of like, do I want to deal with that right now? Or is it just easier to like just make dinner and then like call it a night? You know, like
avoiding the pain and discomfort of having a difficult conversation is definitely a trend in all relationships.
yes.
You know,
Because, I mean, realistically, you can't, every time something comes up, you can't be like, hey, let's take a pause. Like, we need to talk about this for 3 hours. Like, I mean, realistically, you can't always do that, you know? So it's like, there's a realistic component to it when you're dating someone, but you also can't expect those things to like, those 10 conversations to go by or 10 conversations that needed to happen go by, and then there's not an issue, right? But with this, like I guess the concern, right, or where the anxiety would stem from, and I'm inputting my question in the question. Would it make sense for this person to share these feelings with their partner? Like, hey, this is what's been going on, or just kind of leave this out and say, you know, it's been hard for us to make time together, for us to feel connected. I've been feeling this way and this way, and just kind of leave out the kind of, I guess, the other half of the situation. Because, like, is it relevant to bring up or is it not? You know, like, that's, I guess, my question.
Well, are we being open and honest? How honest do you want me to be? See, this is where this is the problem. This is where people will ask for, they say,
that's why I'm asking
I
the
want
question.
honesty, right? And then when you give it to them and it threatens the relationship, what negative reactions and emotions are going to start to come up from this? If I tell you that I have a crush on my boss, right? Or I have a crush on somebody that I work with, forget the fact that's even their boss. It doesn't matter. I just have feelings for somebody else. What does that mean for our relationship? Right? And so it's like, okay, do I frame this in a way that goes from, hey, I want to talk about our relationship. There's some things that I've recognized that, qualities and aspects and traits, personality traits perhaps, that are missing from our relationship that I find attractive. Well, great. That doesn't tell anybody that I have feelings for somebody else. There's another way of saying, hey, I've actually found myself of being attracted to somebody else for these reasons, right? And this is missing from our relationship. Let's talk about it.
So you think that's the better approach?
Look,
I know you can't answer. It has to be case dependent. I totally get that. I'm just asking in general.
I think to me, what is helpful is understanding that the person that you're with isn't going to be perfect. That the person that you've chosen to love is going to fall into situations and have experiences that they themselves don't even want. They didn't wake up one morning and were like, hey, I want to do this. And so if I can get past my own hurt feelings for just a second and recognize what this person is telling me, and recognize that what they're actually talking about is a way to improve our relationship. And it's going to hurt to hear some of these things, that they might be attracted to somebody else. But it also doesn't mean that they're not attracted to me. It might mean that they're looking to open up this communication. So sure, could it hurt?
We both know that. I'm just saying, do you take a person who's maybe not that self-assured with themselves, and you brought this up. I think where a lot of this anxiety is stemming, and maybe I'm just reading into this, but I think a lot of this anxiety is, oh my gosh, is this going to be found out? How would I ever tell this person? You know what I mean? Like, I have these feelings and I probably want to tell them, but I don't know how, because what if they get upset? or leave me or whatever. Like that's a real concern. So it's like, do you even bring that up? Is that even relevant? It's not like, oh, hey, like I've been cheating on you for the past year with this person. Like this is not obviously to that level. This is different. So I think that's probably where some of that anxiety is stemming. So,
well, some people will tell you that a lie of omission is still an omission, is still a lie. But in this case, I think it would be okay for the person to say something like this, like, hey, I want to talk about our relationship. I have found myself attracted to other people or another person who may have these qualities. And I'm telling you that not because I'm going to act on the attraction or that's there, but it's an underlying symptom that something else is missing in our relationship. And I'm not even going to put it all on the other person, because part of this would be for this person to start to explore within themselves, right? Because here's the thing. When your relationship isn't fulfilling you in some ways, are you doing any changing to go with it? Or are you
absolutely.
sitting in the same spot and like somebody new kind of comes in, and it's very easy to idealize that other person. It's very easy to put that person up on a pedestal and be like, oh my God, they have these things which are different from this person. And now those are attractive qualities. And part of it starts to lend itself into, we start getting into desire. We start getting into attention and feeling special and some of those other things. And so part of me wants to start asking this person some exploratory questions. Like, do you resent your partner for not putting in enough effort? Do you feel like they've been putting enough effort in prioritizing you and making you feel special? My answer would be no, because of they're finding themselves kind of immersed by their careers right now and not really putting in that kind of effort. So what feelings of anger and resentment are happening in the relationship? Are you turning away from your partner, or are you turning towards your partner right now? Are you turning away from the person that you've become? Right? It's very easy for us to project our feelings onto our partners and to be like, well, they're not changing, they're not growing. Well, maybe you're running away from the person that you've slowly become. Maybe you've become a person who's not putting in time, effort, and attention. One of the things I was talking about this with somebody, and they were like, yeah, my boyfriend doesn't make as many sexual advances on me as I would like. And so I was like, well, how often are you like coming home and showering and changing and getting out of your gym clothes and putting in a little bit more effort into being something that's a little bit more desirable for what they want? And they were like, well, I'm not. And I was like, okay, so maybe it's not all on him. And I'm not trying to victim blame here or anything. But the relationship road has two sides to it. There's your side and there's the other person's side. And so sometimes we're not always looking for someone else. Sometimes we're looking for a different version of who we are. If you guys are looking for other material on this, like a lot of this has to do with like Esther Perel's philosophies on relationships. She has a lot of great books and material on affairs and redefining what that means. And so sometimes what I recognize is attraction to other people, or even an affair for that matter, isn't necessarily about sex. It's more about, desire. I listen to this person's explanation of what they're looking for, and it doesn't really seem like they're focusing on superficial needs. Like they're talking or identifying specific qualities that aren't necessarily about a person's looks, but more about their content and what might be missing in their relationship, or perhaps within themselves. Oftentimes we can kind of look at our attractions and desires as something that might be missing or incomplete within me. And so it's easy to see those qualities in somebody else and then to say like, well, my boyfriend or girlfriend doesn't have those things. Well, maybe I don't have those things either. And so I admire them in somebody else. And because maybe I can work to provide those things for myself, and then I don't have to rely on my partner to be that person. Now, I'm not saying that they should be a lazy, fat person who sits on the couch all day. But I am saying sometimes the answer to a relationship problem isn't always in our partner. Oftentimes it's within us. And because that's the only side of the street you can control. That's your responsibility. Is that a little clearer?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So you would say the first thing would, and as far as like action steps, so someone would reflect on maybe what's missing within them, and then definitely bring this up to the partner. And I guess we'll leave it open to however you want to approach that. But obviously, honesty is generally the best policy.
Yeah, I mean,
you have to know, we don't know anything about the situation. Like, I don't know what your partner is like, you know what I mean? Like, there could be some other contextual things that we're missing. So I don't want to say that and then it just be something that's really, really negative. So obviously you have to determine how you want to bring that up. But I think that the way that you phrased it made sense in terms of saying like, hey, it's not like I'm doing anything or I'm pursuing this person, but like I have been having these feelings and I find these things interesting. And maybe it's because, again, after more reflection, step one, I haven't been presenting this here, or I felt like maybe we've been lacking this together. And then bring it up. So it's not just like hey, yeah, I find this super attractive about somebody else and you don't have any of that. Like, obviously not the approach, certainly not. And I think almost everybody knows that, but I say that. And when we get upset, right, we have all these things planned. And then when we get upset, we don't always say things that we mean. So that's where step one is really important, to reflect on this. So you kind of have a way that you're going to approach this. Again, maybe I'm just speaking from my experience, but I know like if I'm getting keyed up, like I'm not going to say really the best stuff. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to have my best work when I am upset. So it's usually better to think through it for a while beforehand. I mean, don't sit on this for a year, you know what I mean? But like actually process this first so that you really have like a sound discussion or talking points going into this. And it's not just like a blurt of how like emotional you're feeling, because the words that this person's using, like guilt, confusion, anxiety, like that's a lot. And at some point, like you're just going to hit that point where you're like, this is my breaking point. And that when you feel in that state and you bring this conversation up, I don't think that it's going to end probably how you intended.
Well, right. And maybe recognize too that this isn't a one conversation, one and done kind of a thing. So maybe there's an easing into this that happens. It's like, okay, I want to sit you down and tell you like, look, some things in our relationship have changed. I've changed. I'm owning my side of this. I'm looking at my qualities that I've been doing, the things, the behaviors, whatever it is. I've also been looking at some of those things for you. And so you start by easing into the conversation with that. Right. And then it kind of over 2 or 3 or 4 conversations, maybe then you say, look, yes, part of me has found these qualities in other people to be attractive. Is it necessary to tell them like it's, this person at work? Maybe, maybe not. I'll leave that up to the individual. I guess it just depends on how honest you want to be and whether or not the message is really being conveyed. And if you're truly attracted to somebody else, like then it's a slightly different thing in terms of redefining boundaries and pulling yourself out of a more high-risk situation where you're likely to have an affair, right? Because if you don't and you keep feeding into it and you use it as an escape for what isn't happening in your relationship, like feelings are going to grow, they're going to intensify, and whatever confusion you have now is only going to be amplified. And then you will end up hurting him. You'll hurt yourself in the process, and then probably a third or fourth person somewhere in there too. So, but I guess the underlying theme, if I were to kind of pull this all together, is that new attractions or even an affair or trauma within the relationship can finally create an era of honesty in the relationship. And it can allow for honest and open communication. And so what I mean by that is you can stop upholding this old status quo that wasn't working. It's not the same. You're not the same two people you were the first year or two you started dating, especially 13 years into it. And how willing is this person to talk? How willing are they to make changes? What are some of the qualities and attributes that they have that are amazing? You can be idealizing this other person that you're meeting and understand this, that like, that's a fairly common thing. You meet somebody new, we put them on a pedestal. We're like, they're perfect. They're amazing. Trust me, like 3 years into a relationship with anybody, they're not going to be perfect anymore. Okay. They're going to be flawed human beings just like somebody else. And then this is going to come up again, the ability to communicate your needs and your wants. And so I guess the final note, or one of the final notes that I want to leave you guys on, is communication is always a two-way street. And you can't control whether or not the other person is going to be able to share with you in an open and honest way. You can't control their reactions to things, but you are responsible for your side of this. It's your side of the street that you're responsible for. And if you feel like a conversation might not go well, then start by writing some letters. Start by sending an email. Start by sending a text message if you have to. Like, I hate text because it can be misconstrued some ways. But it can start. But here's the other thing. Let go of the results. Some of this isn't about whether or not things are going to change. Some of this is about whether or not you can communicate your needs, your wants, and your desires. And that, I think, is more fundamental than the change that can actually occur in the relationship. Because whether or not it's reciprocated, you still have to do your part. And so, understand that this is normal. She is in a long-term relationship, and these are the kind of problems that come up. These are just the grooves of the peaks and valleys of a relationship, and you're gonna be in them no matter who you're with and for how long you're with them. Like, it's inevitable. So learning how to communicate your way through it, that's the lesson to take from this.
Absolutely. So we hope that this gives you some pathway forward. This is certainly not an easy situation, but we really appreciate this question. And honestly, if you guys want to send in any questions, we love these types of discussions because it is so specific, but also, general lessons that everybody can take away from it. So if you do have any questions for us, we do have an anonymous link below in the show notes, or you can also send an email to info@teamlocofit.com, or you can just send me a message on Instagram. I may or may not see it though, so maybe not the best way. I don't know why I even said that. So let's just scratch that one, because
DM Lauren.
My toxic trait is either answering right away or not for like weeks at all. It's really great. But yes, thank you so much for this question, and we really hope that this gives you, whoever asked, some direction, and then also everybody else listening, kind of a framework of how to move forward through this really common yet challenging situation. So for all the information about our coaching services, you can visit teamlocofit.com. What is your email?
FullCircleTherapyFL@gmail.com.
Longest email ever. And then for more information on our app, which has training, macros, meal plans, all great stuff, mental health resources, you can visit redefinehealthy.com. And if you guys enjoyed the show, please share it. We would really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you next week.